wound that hurts the most tonight is very often the one that closed a long time ago. This is strange to say, and stranger still to feel, because we are taught to think of wounds as things that heal on a timeline. A cut closes in days, a break mends in weeks, a loss softens in months or years, and eventually, if enough time passes, the wound should simply be gone, closed. A scar at most, pale and quiet, a mark that says something happened here once, but does not say it still hurts. But some wounds do not follow this timeline. Some wounds close on the outside and remain open somewhere beneath, in a place that ordinary time does not reach. You touch them by accident. A smell, a season, a stranger's laugh that sounds like someone else's laugh. A date on a calendar that used to mean something and now means something different. And the wound announces itself as though no time has passed at all, as though it happened yesterday, as though the years in between were a kind of waiting room, and the wound was simply waiting there with you, patient, for the moment you would walk back through the door. This is the paradox we sit with tonight, that closing and healing are not the same thing. A wound can close on the surface, can stop being visible, can stop requiring bandages or attention, and can still underneath remain exactly as raw as the day it opened. We call this healed because it looks healed, but the person carrying it knows in the quiet hours that something else is true. You know this wound. You may not have thought of it in those words, a thing that closed but did not heal. You may have simply thought of yourself as someone who is fine now, who has moved on, who does not need to speak of it, because speaking of it would suggest that it still matters, and you have worked so hard to arrive at a place where it does not have to matter anymore. And yet here you are, at this hour in this dark, and the thing is present in a way you did not summon and cannot easily dismiss. This is not a failure. It is not evidence that you have done your grieving wrong, or healed incorrectly, or failed some test of resilience that other people seem to pass more gracefully. It is simply what old wounds do. Sometimes, when the closing happens faster than the healing, when the world requires you to look fine again before the underneath part has finished its slow work. Consider how quickly the world asks us to look healed after something difficult happens. A period of bereavement leave measured in days. A friend's patient attention that, however genuine in the early weeks, gradually shifts toward an unspoken expectation that the subject will come up less often as months pass. A workplace, a family gathering, an ordinary social exchange, all of them built around the assumption that grief has a reasonable expiration point, after which continuing to carry it becomes in some unspoken way a burden on the people around us, rather than simply a fact about our own experience. Most of us absorb this expectation long before we ever examine it directly. We learn, often without anyone teaching us explicitly, that grief has a socially acceptable shelf life, and that exceeding it marks us as someone who is struggling to cope rather than someone who is simply still in the middle of a process that never agreed to anyone else's timeline. And so we perform the closing. We present the version of ourselves that looks recovered, that can discuss the loss without visible difficulty, that has, by all outward appearances, moved on, while the underneath part continues its work in private, unwitnessed, sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime. Tonight, we will sit with 7 stories that have been told in different forms across the long history of Buddhist teaching. Stories about wounds that would not close and the people who carried them, and what was eventually discovered, not through force and not through forgetting, but through a different kind of attention, a gentler kind, the kind that does not try to make the wound behave, but simply stays present with it the way you might stay present with a frightened animal, not fixing, not rushing, simply staying until something in the wound itself begins, on its own unhurried timeline, to soften. The teaching beneath these stories touches some things the tradition returns to often. That suffering is not always the same as pain. Pain is the wound itself, the loss, the injury, the thing that happened. Suffering is often what we add on top of the pain through our relationship to it, through resistance, through the demand that it should already be over, through the exhausting effort of fighting something that does not respond to force. The old teachers sometimes illustrated this with a simple image. Being struck once is painful, but if, after being struck, we strike ourselves again and again with our own thoughts about the striking, why did this happen to me? Why can't I get over this? What is wrong with me that this still hurts? We have multiplied one wound into many. The first wound was not our choice. The others we are adding ourselves, in the belief that adding them will somehow make us stronger, or make the healing come faster, or make us worthy of being past it. There is another way. Not a faster way, necessarily. Old wounds do not always close quickly, no matter how gently we hold them, but a way that does not add unnecessary weight to what is already heavy, a way of tending rather than fighting, of staying rather than forcing, of allowing the wound the actual time it needs, rather than the time we have decided it should have taken. This is not the same as passivity, and it is worth being clear about that distinction from the outset, because gentleness is sometimes mistaken for giving up. Tending a wound is an active practice. It requires attention, care, a willingness to stay present with something uncomfortable rather than turning away from it entirely. What tending does not require is force. It does not require us to will. The wound closed through sheer determination, to shame ourselves for its continued presence, or to measure our worth against how quickly we manage to move past something that may never fully move past us in the way we imagine it should. There is an old image sometimes used to describe this difference. A fist held tightly around something painful will eventually tire and ache from the holding itself, regardless of what it is holding. An open hand resting beneath the same painful thing without gripping it tires far less, even though the weight it carries has not changed. The wound in both cases is identical. What differs is the manner of holding, and it is the manner of holding more than the wound itself that determines how exhausted we become in carrying it across months and years. Tonight's stories will return again and again to this same distinction. not whether the wound closes, but how it is held while it does whatever it is going to do, on its own timeline, in its own way. We will explore this tonight, slowly, story by story. Let the night hold what needs holding, patiently, without hurry, for as long as the holding is needed. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Some of you are coming to this hour carrying something specific, an anniversary that has passed recently or is approaching, or that never quite stops approaching, because grief does not always move in a straight line away from its source. Some of you are here because a wound you thought had closed opened again today, without warning, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and you have spent the hours since trying to understand why something you believed was behind you suddenly felt as present as it ever was. Some of you are not sure what wound you are carrying tonight, only that something in you needed a place that would not ask you to explain it, would not ask you to justify why it still hurts after all this time, would not require you to perform the version of yourself that has moved on. This is that place. Nothing here requires an explanation. The wound, whatever it is, whatever age it is welcome exactly as it is. Some of you have been carrying something for so long that you have nearly stopped recognizing it as a wound at all. It has simply become a quality of how you move through the world, a low and constant note beneath everything else. Familiar enough now that you rarely stop to name it directly. If this is you, there is no requirement tonight to name it either. You do not need words for what you carry in order for the carrying to be acknowledged. Simply being here, simply allowing yourself this hour of rest is itself a form of tending. And some of you may be listening tonight on behalf of someone else, a friend, a parent, a partner, someone whose old wound you have watched from the outside without fully knowing how to help them carry it. If this is you, know that your presence here, your attention to this question, even in service of someone you love, is itself a form of the gentleness this teaching points toward. You do not have to solve another person's wound to be a source of comfort to them. Sometimes staying present without demanding resolution is the most generous thing we can offer anyone, including ourselves. We are glad you came, whoever you are, whatever hour brought you here. There is no wrong amount of time for a wound to still be tender. There is no schedule you have failed to keep, no deadline for grief that you have somehow missed. We will begin now, together, and we will go slowly, because slowness is what old wounds ask for, even when the world around us keeps asking for speed. There is a teaching that has been passed down through many generations of practice, often illustrated with the same simple image, 2 arrows. The first arrow is the pain itself. Whatever happened, whatever was lost, whatever wound was opened by circumstances outside our control, this arrow we did not choose. It arrives the way storms arrive, the way illness, loss arrives, uninvited, and often without warning, striking us in a place we did not know could be struck until it already was. The second arrow is different. The second arrow is the one we often fire at ourselves in the aftermath of the first. The arrow of resistance, of self-judgment, of the belief that we should already be over something that has not finished its work in us. Why do I still feel this? What is wrong with me that I have not healed? Everyone else seems to move past these things. Why can't I? This second arrow does not undo the first. It only adds a second wound to a place that was already wounded, and it is, unlike the first, entirely within our power to withhold. This teaching is old, and it is simple, and like most simple teachings, it is far easier to understand than to practice, because the second arrow does not feel like something we are choosing. It feels like an accurate assessment. Surely, after all this time, the wound should be different. Surely there is something wrong if it is not. The voice that fires the second arrow sounds, most of the time, like reason, like honesty, like the voice that keeps us accountable and moving forward. It rarely sounds like cruelty, even when its effect is cruel. This is, perhaps, the most important thing to understand about the second arrow before we go further. It disguises itself as helpfulness. It tells us that if we simply judge ourselves harshly enough for still hurting, we will somehow motivate ourselves into healing faster. It tells us that self-compassion toward an old wound is a form of self-indulgence, a failure to hold ourselves to the standard that stronger, more resilient people supposedly meet without difficulty. It compares us, always unfavorably, to some imagined version of a person who would have handled this better, moved on faster, carried it more gracefully, a person who, on closer examination, usually turns out not to exist at all, or to exist only because we never saw what that person carried privately, in their own quiet hours, behind whatever composed face they presented to the world. The old teachers understood this disguise well, which is why they so often taught through story rather than through direct instruction. A direct instruction, stop judging yourself for still hurting, tends to produce almost immediately a third arrow, judgment for failing to stop the judgment. Stories work differently. They allow the listener to recognize the pattern in someone else's life first, at a safe distance, before quietly noticing that the same pattern lives in their own. This is the gift stories offer that direct instruction cannot. The chance to see clearly through someone else's wound what has been too close to examine clearly in our own. Tonight's stories are, in different ways, about people who discovered the second arrow they had been firing at themselves, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, and who found, through circumstances they did not expect, a way to set that particular bow down. Not the first arrow. The first arrow was real and stays real, and some of it never fully disappears. But the second arrow, the arrow of demanding the wound behave differently than it does, that one, it turns out, was always optional. There is a companion teaching, less often spoken but equally important, that a wound tended gently closes according to its own nature, and a wound fought closes according to nothing at all, because a wound under attack does not close, it only learns to hide. This is why so many old wounds that appear healed are not healed. They have simply learned, under the pressure of our impatience, to stay out of sight. And they remain waiting, exactly as raw as the day the first arrow struck, until something, a smell, a season, a story like the ones we will hear tonight, reminds them they are still there. There is a reason old wounds hide so effectively, and it has to do with the particular relationship between attention and pain. When we fight a wound, when we demand through sheer will that it stop hurting, stop mattering, stop interrupting the smooth functioning of our days, we are, in effect, training ourselves to suppress our own awareness of it. Suppression is not the same as healing, though it can look remarkably similar from the outside, and can even feel, for a time, like relief. The wound is not being processed during suppression. It is being buried beneath an increasingly effortful layer of not noticing. And the effort required to maintain that layer tends to grow over time, not shrink, because the underlying wound has not actually changed. This is why so many people arrive, years or even decades after a loss, at a moment where the wound reappears with an intensity that seems disproportionate to whatever small thing triggered it. A song on the radio, a stranger's gesture, an ordinary Tuesday that happens to fall near an anniversary the conscious mind had stopped tracking. The wound was never actually gone. It had simply been successfully hidden for a time beneath the considerable effort of a mind determined not to feel it. And hidden wounds, unlike tended ones, do not diminish with time. They wait, patient and unchanged, for the moment the hiding fails. The invitation of tonight's stories is to consider a different relationship to the old wounds each of us carries, not fighting them into silence and not being overwhelmed by them either, but the middle path the old teachers so often pointed toward, staying present with what hurts without either suppressing it or being consumed by it. This is, admittedly, a difficult balance to strike, and none of the people in tonight's stories arrived at it quickly or without considerable struggle, but each of them found their way, in their own time, to something gentler than the fight they had been engaged in. And that gentleness, more than any dramatic resolution, is what we will be sitting with together tonight. 7 stories are ready. Let us begin gently. Let us explore a story about a woman who searched every house in her village for a single mustard seed. There was a young mother named Gotami who lived in a village at the edge of a great forest in a time so long past that the stories about her have been told and retold for more centuries than anyone can count with certainty. She had married young into a family of modest means and had endured, as many young women of her circumstance did, a period of difficulty before her position in her husband's household was secure. The particular hardship of being newly arrived in a family that had not yet decided to value her. Everything changed when she gave birth to a son. The child transformed her standing entirely. She was no longer merely a wife who had come from elsewhere, but a mother, and the mother of a son which in that time and place carried its own weight of meaning and security. She loved the boy with the specific ferocity of a woman who has found, in one small body, both her heart and her safety at once. The boy was perhaps a year old, just beginning to walk with the uncertain determination of children at that age, when he fell ill. The illness came quickly, as illnesses did in those times, without warning and without mercy, and within days the boy was dead. Gotami did not accept this, not in the ordinary sense of grief's denial, which passes in hours or days as the reality settles. Her refusal was total and did not pass. She carried the boy's small body in her arms and went from house to house in the village, asking if anyone knew of medicine that could revive him. The villagers, who understood what she could not yet let herself understand, looked at her with pity and said nothing, or said gently that the child was already gone, or turned away because they did not know how to be present with a grief so far past what words could reach. In those first days, Gotami moved through the village with the boy's small body wrapped carefully against her, stopping at every doorway she passed. Her request always the same: "Does anyone here know a remedy that could revive my son?" Most who saw her recognized immediately what had happened and what she could not yet accept, and their responses ranged from gentle deflection to careful silence, none of them willing to be the one who told her plainly that no remedy existed for what she was asking. The village elders, watching this unfold over the course of several days, grew increasingly concerned, not only for the child, whose condition made clear to everyone but his mother that no remedy remained available, but for Gotami herself, who had not eaten properly, had not slept in any real sense, and had begun to appear to those who loved her like a woman standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than grief alone. Her own mother came to plead with her to let the child be properly mourned and released. Gotami would not hear it. She held the boy against her chest with the particular fierce gentleness of a mother who has decided against all evidence that surrender is not yet required, and she continued asking every person she encountered whether they knew of any remedy that might still work. Someone, a kind neighbor who did not know what else to offer, but who could see that ordinary reasoning would not reach her, suggested that she seek out the teacher who was known to be traveling through the region, a man renowned for wisdom that went beyond ordinary medicine, in the hope that whatever he might say to her would land where nothing else had. Gotami went to him, still carrying the child, and asked if he could restore her son to life. The teacher looked at her for a long moment, not with pity, which she had received enough of already, and which had done nothing for her, but with the particular attention of someone who could see exactly what she needed, which was not comfort but a path forward. However strange that path might be, he said, "I can help you, but I will need a single mustard seed brought to me from a house in this village where death has never visited. Bring me that seed, and I will use it to bring your son back." Gotami's heart lifted with a hope so sudden and complete that she did not stop to question the strangeness of the request. Mustard seed was common in every household. Surely this would be simple. She went immediately to the nearest house and asked for a seed. The family there was willing to give her one, but when she asked, as instructed, whether death had ever visited their house, the mother of that household grew quiet and said, "Yes, my mother-in-law died in this house 2 winters ago." Gotami thanked them and went to the next house. The answer there was the same, a different loss, a different name, but the same truth. This house too had known death. She went to a third house, and a fourth, and a fifth, walking through the entire village as the day grew long and then longer, and at every door she received the same combination: willingness to give the seed and the quiet, unavoidable admission that death had come here too. A grandfather, a child once in this house as well, a young husband taken by fever, a wife lost in childbirth. House after house, family after family, each one carrying its own version of exactly what she was carrying, each one having found some way to continue living inside a loss that had once seemed impossible to survive. By the time the sun began to set, Gotami had visited every house in the village and had not found a single one untouched by death. And somewhere in the walking, not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, house by house, story by story, something in her began to shift. She was not the only one. Her grief, which had felt like an anomaly, a wrongness in the fabric of things that surely could be undone if she simply found the right remedy, was instead the most ordinary thing in the world. Every house held its version of this. Every family had walked, at some point, through exactly this door. She returned to the teacher without a seed. She said, "I did not find a house that has not known death." He said, "Then you have found what I sent you to find, not the seed. There is no seed that could do what you asked. But the truth that your grief, though it is entirely and uniquely yours, is not a wrongness in the world. It is the world. Death visits every house eventually. There is no household exempt, no family untouched, no village anywhere that has escaped this particular grief. You are not alone in what has happened to you, even though you feel, in this moment, more alone than you have ever felt in your life." Gotami sat with this for a long time. She did not stop grieving. The teacher did not ask her to, and grief of this depth does not simply stop because it has been given context. But something had changed in the shape of her carrying. She was no longer fighting a wrongness that should not have happened to her specifically. She was grieving something that was, however unbearably, part of the shared condition of every person who has ever loved someone they eventually lost. And in that shared condition, she found something she had not expected to find. Not less pain, but less isolation inside the pain. Not a smaller wound, but a wound that no longer insisted she carry it as though she were the only person who had ever been asked to. You have walked this village too, in whatever form your grief has taken. You have perhaps believed in the deepest part of the wound that your loss is somehow uniquely unbearable, uniquely unfair, uniquely yours in a way that separates you from everyone who has not experienced exactly what you have experienced. And this is true. No one has experienced exactly what you have experienced in exactly the configuration that makes it yours. But the shape beneath it, the shape of loving someone and then losing them, of a wound that does not close on the schedule we would prefer, of grief that outlasts the sympathy of others and asks to be carried long after the world has moved on. That shape belongs to every house in the village. You are not the only one walking this road tonight. Even in the hours when it feels most like you are, even in the deepest and loneliest part of the night, there is something particular about the isolation that grief brings that is worth naming directly, because it is one of the cruelest tricks the wound plays on us. In the moment of loss, and often for a very long time afterward, we experience our grief as evidence of separation, as though the depth of what we feel proves that we have been singled out by circumstance in a way that sets us apart from everyone whose lives continue around us untouched. The world keeps moving. People return to their ordinary concerns within days or weeks, and the person still carrying the wound often concludes in the quiet hours that this difference in pace means something about them specifically, that they are grieving wrong, grieving too long, grieving too visibly for a world that has already moved on without them. Gotami's walk through the village dismantles this trick, house by house. It does not dismantle the grief itself. She still carried her son, still felt the full weight of what had happened to her for the rest of the story, and, we can assume, for a very long time after. But it dismantled the specific and additional suffering of believing herself uniquely marked by a wrongness that no one else had ever experienced. Every house had walked this road. The road did not become easier because of this knowledge, but the walking became less lonely, and sometimes, in the middle of the deepest grief, less lonely is the only kind of easier that is actually available to us. Let us pause here for a moment. Gotami and the mustard seed, and the village where every house held its own grief. Let the body rest with the recognition that whatever wound you carry tonight, however uniquely yours it feels, it is also part of something shared, a road walked by every person who has ever loved and lost. Simply breathe gently without hurry. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a gardener and the tree that lightning found. In the garden of a monastery that had stood on a hillside for many generations, there grew an old cedar tree, not the oldest tree in the garden, but among the most admired, its branches spreading in the wide, deliberate pattern that comes from centuries of unhurried growth. The monks who tended the garden had a particular fondness for this tree. It had grown up alongside the monastery itself, planted, according to the old records, in the same decade the first stones of the main hall were laid. In the summer of a particularly violent storm season, lightning struck the cedar directly. The strike split a portion of the trunk, leaving a deep vertical wound that ran from a point midway up the tree down to its base. Pale wood exposed where the bark had been torn away, a wound so severe that the gardener monk, a man named Hui, who had tended the garden for over 20 years, believed, at first, the tree would not survive. The tree did survive, but the wound did not close in the way that smaller wounds close on other trees, through the slow overgrowth of bark that eventually seals a scar entirely from view. The strike had been too deep, had damaged too much of the tree's living tissue along that vertical line for a complete seal to be possible. The wound remained visible for the rest of the tree's life, a a long, pale scar running down one side of the trunk, never fully closed, always slightly open at its edges, even as the tree around it continued to grow. In the first spring after the strike, we had watched the cedar with the particular anxiety of someone waiting to see whether a serious injury would prove fatal in the end, even after the immediate danger seemed to pass. The tree budded that spring more sparsely than it had in previous years, a visible sign of the resources it was directing towards survival rather than toward the fullness of its usual growth. By the second spring, the budding had returned closer to its former abundance, though the wound itself showed no sign of closing. By the fifth year, Hui had come to understand that the wound's appearance had stabilized. It would weather, would darken slightly with age, the way exposed wood does, but it would not disappear. No matter how many more decades the tree continued to live. Hui spent many years troubled by this. He had, in the manner of gardeners who care deeply about the things they tend, developed something like affection for the cedar, and the visible wound felt to him like an ongoing failure. His failure, though he knew rationally that lightning was not something a gardener could have prevented. He tried various remedies in the early years. Treatments applied to the wound to encourage faster closing, protective coverings meant to shield it from further damage, adjustments to watering and feeding meant to give the tree every possible resource to heal itself completely. None of these accelerated the closing. The wound remained exactly as it was, slowly weathering with age but never sealing. An older monk, near the end of his own long life, found Hui one afternoon standing before the cedar with the particular posture of a person troubled by something they cannot fix. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the pale scar with the expression of someone reviewing, yet again, an old and unresolved account. The older monk had tended this same garden decades before Hui, and had watched the tree since before the lightning struck it, and he recognized in Hui's posture something he himself had once carried in his own younger years, toward a different wounded tree in a different corner of the same garden. He said, "You are still trying to close that wound." Hui said, "It should have healed by now. 20 years, and it is exactly as open as it was in the first season." The older monk said, "Has the tree suffered for it? Has it stopped growing? Has it stopped giving shade, or dropping its cones, or standing exactly where it has always stood?" Hui considered this. He said, "No, the tree is otherwise thriving. It has grown taller in these 20 years than in the 20 before the strike." The older monk said, "Then perhaps the wound was never meant to close in the way you have been hoping. Some wounds run too deep, damage too much of what would be needed to seal them fully, and the tree's task is not to close them, but to grow around them, to continue living, continue producing, continue standing, with the wound present, but no longer at the center of what the tree is doing. The wound becomes part of the tree's shape, rather than an obstacle to it. Look at how the trunk has thickened on either side of the scar, compensating, finding new pathways for what the wound no longer carries efficiently. The tree did not defeat the wound. It found a way to live fully alongside it. Hui said, "I wanted it to be as though the lightning never struck." The older monk said, "I understand the wanting, but the lightning did strike, and the tree is not less remarkable for carrying the mark of it. If anything, visitors to this garden are drawn to this tree precisely because of the scar, because it tells a story that a perfectly unmarked tree cannot tell. The wound has become part of what makes this cedar, rather than any cedar." Hui returned to his work with a different relationship to the tree after that conversation. He stopped applying remedies meant to force the closing. He continued to tend the tree, watering it, protecting it from further harm, giving it what care he could. But he released the specific goal of making the wound disappear, and in the years that followed, he found that his troubled feeling toward the tree eased considerably, not because the wound had changed, but because his demand of it had changed. He was no longer asking the tree to erase what had happened to it. He was simply asking it to keep growing, wound and all, which it had been doing the entire time regardless of his intervention. You have a wound like this, a place in your history that did not close the way smaller wounds close, that remains visible in some form no matter how many years pass, no matter what remedies you have tried. You may have spent real effort trying to make it seal completely, trying to arrive at a version of yourself in which this thing never happened, or happened but left no mark at all. And you may have felt, each time, the wound remained visible despite your effort, that you were failing at something, that healing correctly would have meant the mark disappearing entirely. The cedar did not fail. It grew taller than it had before the strike, wound and all. The wound did not have to disappear for the tree to be fully, remarkably alive. Perhaps yours does not either. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from treating a wound as a problem to be solved, rather than a condition to be lived alongside. An exhaustion that we carried for 20 years before the older monk's observation released him from it. Every remedy he applied, every treatment meant to accelerate the closing, was born from a belief that the visible scar represented an unfinished task, something incomplete that reflected poorly on his care as a gardener and, more quietly, on the tree's own vitality. This belief kept him in a state of low-grade vigilance for 2 decades. Always slightly dissatisfied, always slightly failing, measuring the tree against a standard of complete healing that the lightning strike had made permanently unreachable. The relief that came was not the relief of finally succeeding at closing the wound. It was the relief of releasing a goal that had never been achievable in the first place, and discovering that the tree had been thriving the entire time regardless, that his 20 years of quiet dissatisfaction had been unnecessary, had added nothing to the tree's actual well-being, had only added weight to his own experience of caring for it. The cedar did not need him to solve its wound. It needed him to keep watering it, protecting it from further harm, and otherwise letting it do what trees do, which is grow, in whatever configuration their history has left them. You may be carrying a version of Hui's 2 decades, measuring some part of your own life against a standard of complete healing that circumstances have made permanently unreachable, and experiencing every day that the wound remains visible as a small, quiet failure. The teaching offered here is not that you should stop caring for the wound any more than Hui stopped watering his cedar. It is that the goal of complete disappearance may have never been the correct measure of whether you are healing well. Growth around a scar, taller and stronger than before, may be the only kind of healing some wounds were ever going to offer, and it may be entirely sufficient. Let us pause here for a moment quietly. We and the cedar and the wound that never sealed but never stopped the tree from growing. Let the body consider gently whatever mark you carry that has not disappeared despite your effort. Perhaps it was never asking to disappear. Perhaps it was only asking to be grown around. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a young monk who could not stop touching an old wound. There was a boy named Kenji who came to a small mountain temple at the age of 8, sent by his family, after circumstances that were never fully explained to the other monks, and that Kenji himself rarely spoke of. He carried on his left forearm a scar from a burn that had happened before his arrival, an injury from his early childhood, healed on the surface but still slightly raised, slightly different in texture from the surrounding skin, a permanent mark that would remain with him for the rest of his life. The other children at the temple, for there were a few sons of families who had sent them to the mountain for education, noticed the scar sometimes, asked about it in the unguarded way children ask about things, and Kenji had developed, by the time he arrived, a habit of touching the scar whenever the subject came up, running his fingers along its raised edge, pressing it slightly as though checking that it was still there, still real, still exactly as it had always been. He did this in quiet moments too, unprompted by any question from anyone else, during long stretches of solitary chore work, during the still minutes before sleep, sometimes even during meditation periods when he was meant to be attending to his breath and instead found his hand had wandered, without his full awareness, back to the familiar raised line on his forearm. An elderly monk named Master Rio noticed this habit within his first weeks of observing the boy. He said nothing about it directly. At first, simply watching the way experienced teachers often watch before they intervene, waiting to understand the shape of a thing before deciding whether and how to address it. After some months, during a quiet afternoon when Kenji was engaged in his habitual touching of the scar while lost in some private thought, Master Rio sat down across from him and asked, gently, "Does it still hurt when you touch it that way?" Kenji considered the question, which was not a question anyone had asked him before. People usually asked about the scar's origin, not about the touching itself. He said, "No, it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just there. I don't know why I touch it." Master Rio said, "May I tell you something I have noticed, watching gardeners over many years? When a plant is wounded, a broken stem, a torn leaf, the gardener's task is to protect it long enough for for its own healing processes to do their work. But if the gardener keeps touching the wound, keeps checking it, keeps pressing on it to see how it is progressing, the touching itself becomes a kind of ongoing irritation, not because the touching is violent, simply because healing requires a period of being left alone, and the checking interrupts that period, over and over, resetting the clock each time. Kenji said, "But I'm not trying to hurt it. I'm just checking." Master Ryo said, "I believe you. The checking does not come from wanting to cause pain. It comes, I suspect, from something else. Perhaps from not quite trusting that the wound is really there, really healed as much as it can heal, really a permanent and settled part of you, rather than something that might still change if you stop paying attention to it. The touching is a kind of vigilance, but vigilance held for long enough over an old wound becomes its own kind of wound, not the burn itself, but the habit of returning to it again and again, as though it needs your constant supervision to remain what it already is. Kenji sat with this. He said, "How do I stop?" Master Ryo said, "I don't think the goal is to stop noticing the scar, or to pretend it isn't there, or to force yourself never to touch it again through sheer effort of will. That kind of forcing usually just creates a different, quieter form of the same vigilance. I think the practice is simpler and slower than that. Each time you notice your fingers moving toward it, you might simply notice the moving, without judgment, and ask yourself, does this touching serve anything right now? Or is it simply an old habit visiting? And then you let your fingers do what they will, without punishing yourself either way. Over time, simply noticing tends to loosen habits that force cannot loosen. Not because you have defeated the habit, but because you have stopped needing it to hide from your own awareness." Kenji practiced this in his imperfect way over the following years, noticing the reaching, sometimes still reaching anyway, sometimes not, without treating either outcome as a victory or a failure. There were weeks where the noticing came easily, where he caught his hand halfway to his forearm and simply observed the impulse with something close to curiosity. There were other weeks, particularly during periods of stress, or when questions about his early years resurfaced unexpectedly, where the old habit reasserted itself as strongly as ever, and he found himself pressing the scar dozens of times in a single day without any of the gentle awareness Master Ryo had described. He did not treat these harder weeks as evidence that the practice had failed. He simply returned to noticing again the next time he remembered to, and slowly, without any dramatic turning point he could point to, later the habit loosened, not because the scar changed. It remained exactly as it had always been, raised and slightly different from the skin around it, but his relationship to touching it, the vigilance and the checking, the not quite trusting that it was simply and permanently there, softened until touching it became, occasionally, simply something his hand did, without the anxious quality it once carried. You may have a version of this touching, not literal, perhaps, but the mental equivalent, the returning to an old wound in your thoughts, checking on it, pressing on it slightly, to see if it still hurts, as though the wound requires your constant supervision to remain settled. This checking, like Kenji's, does not usually come from wanting to suffer. It comes from something more tender, from not quite trusting yet that the wound is allowed to simply be there, permanent and quiet, without your ongoing vigilance. You are allowed to notice the reaching, without punishing yourself for reaching, and without forcing yourself to stop. The loosening tends to come on its own, in its own unhurried time, once the vigilance is met with simple noticing rather than more effort. Master Ryo's insight touches something deeper than habit alone. It touches the particular relationship many of us develop with old wounds, in which the wound becomes, without our choosing it consciously, a kind of proof of our own history. Kenji's scar was not only a physical mark, it was, in some quiet way, evidence that the difficult things his family had never explained to him had actually happened, that his early years had contained something real and hard, even if no one around him ever spoke of it directly. The touching, the checking, may have been less about the wound itself and more about confirming again and again that his own history was real and had not been erased or denied by the silence that surrounded it. This is worth sitting with because it reframes what looks like an unhealthy habit into something more tender, a child's way of holding on to the truth of what happened to him in the absence of anyone else willing to hold it with him. The scar became his witness, since no other witness was offered, and witnesses, once found, are difficult to release, even when the finding causes its own quiet, ongoing discomfort. If you find yourself checking on an old wound the way Kenji checked on his, it may be worth asking, gently, what the checking is actually protecting. Sometimes it protects nothing but habit, but sometimes it protects a truth that has never been fully witnessed by anyone else. A truth that deserves acknowledgement, perhaps for the first time, rather than simply being asked to stop needing acknowledgement at all. Let us pause here for a moment, together, unhurried. Kenji, and the scar he could not stop touching, and Master Ryo's gentle observation about vigilance becoming its own wound. Let the body notice, without judgment, whatever old wound you find yourself checking on. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about two brothers who did not speak for 11 years. There were two brothers, Han and Bo, raised in a merchant family in a coastal town, close in age, and closer still in the particular bond that some siblings develop, a shared language of jokes and glances, an assumption of loyalty so complete that neither had ever needed to test it, until circumstances tested it without their permission. Their father's business, upon his death, was left to be divided between them, and the division, meant to be equal, became complicated by decisions Han had made in the final years of their father's illness. Decisions that Bo learned about only after their father's death, and that he believed, with real justification, had unfairly favored Han's portion of the inheritance. Han, for his part, believed his decisions had been necessary and reasonable given the burdens he had carried during their father's decline. Burdens Bo, who had lived farther away during those years, had not shared. The disagreement, which might in different circumstances have been resolved through a difficult but survivable conversation, instead calcified into a rupture. Neither brother found a way to cross. Words were said in the heat of the initial confrontation that neither could fully take back. Bo had called Han's judgment during their father's illness a kind of theft, dressed up as necessity, and Han had responded that Bo's distance during those same difficult years disqualified him from judging decisions he had not been present to help make. Both accusations contained enough truth to wound deeply, and enough unfairness to make the other feel entirely justified in refusing to yield. Bo left the town within the month, relocating to a city some distance away, where he built, over the following years, a modest but respectable trade of his own. Han remained in the family home, continuing the business their father had built, and in the early years after the rupture, he told himself and others that the separation was simply practical, that Bo's life had taken him elsewhere regardless of the inheritance dispute, and that time apart was a natural consequence of circumstance rather than an active wound between them. This story became easier to tell than the truth, and Han told it often enough to enough people that he nearly came to believe it himself. For 11 years, the brothers did not speak, not through a single dramatic decision to never speak again, but through the accumulation of each year, making the silence slightly more permanent, slightly harder to break, until the not speaking became its own kind of relationship, defining them to each other as thoroughly as speaking once had. Letters were occasionally drafted by one brother or the other in moments of loneliness or nostalgia, and almost as often left unsent, because each unsent letter carried within it a fear neither brother could quite name, that reaching out first would be read by the other as an admission of fault, and that admission felt, after so many years of calcified certainty, like more than either was willing to offer. Their mother, throughout these 11 years, occupied the difficult position of the parent caught between two children who each still loved her fully, while refusing to be in the same room as the other. She traveled to visit each brother separately, careful never to mention one in front of the other, careful never to take sides, even when each, in private moments with her alone, pressed her gently to agree that he had been the wronged party. She carried her own quiet grief through these years, the grief of watching two people she loved refuse each other for reasons that seemed, from her vantage point as their mother, smaller with each passing year than either of them was willing to admit. In the 11th year, their mother, who had watched this rupture with the particular grief of a parent, unable to mend what her children could not mend themselves, became seriously ill. She asked from her bed for both her sons to come to her, and both came, arriving within a day of each other, the first time they had been in the same room in over a decade. They did not speak directly to each other in the first hours, moving carefully around each other in their mother's small house, addressing all communication about her care through her attendants, or through careful formal phrases that acknowledged the other's presence without engaging it. Their mother, watching this from her bed, said very little at first. She was weak, and speaking cost her effort she did not have to spare. On the third night, when it had become clear that her illness would not improve, she asked to speak with both of them together without the attendants present. Han and Bo came to her bedside, standing on opposite sides of the bed, not looking at each other. She said, slowly, with the effort of someone whose voice was failing, "I do not have the strength to referee this. I do not know all the details of what happened between you, and at this point in my life, I find I do not much care who was more right. What I know is that I raised two boys who loved each other before either of you knew what an inheritance was. I watched that love exist before this wound, and I would like, before I die, to know that it might exist after it too, not because the wound is resolved, but because the love was always larger than any single wound could be, if you let it be." Neither brother spoke for a long moment. Then Bo said quietly, not looking at Han directly, but speaking in his direction, "I have missed you. I have been so angry that I forgot, for a long time, that I have also simply missed you." Han said, after a silence that felt long to both of them, "I have missed you too. I don't know how to undo what happened. I don't know if I even agree, still, about all of it." Bo said, "I don't think we have to agree about all of it. I think I came here believing I needed you to admit I was right before I could forgive you. But watching Mother like this, I find that isn't true anymore. I would rather have my brother than be right." This did not resolve everything between them in a single conversation. Old wounds this deep rarely dissolve completely in one exchange, however sincere. There remained, in the months that followed, moments of old irritation resurfacing, old assumptions about each other that took considerable time to unlearn. Conversations that occasionally circled back toward the original grievance before one brother or the other, remembering their mother's words, chose to let it go rather than reopen the argument in full. But it began something. Their mother died some days later, and in the time surrounding her death and after it, the brothers found their way back into a relationship that was not the same as before the rupture. It carried the scar of those 11 years permanently within it, a wariness that never fully disappeared, a caution around certain subjects that both of them simply learned to navigate around. But that was, nonetheless, a real relationship, rebuilt slowly on the recognition that the love between them had never actually required either of them to be proven right. You may carry a wound like this, an estrangement, a rupture with someone you once loved without complication, a silence that has calcified over years into something that feels unbreakable simply because it has lasted so long. The 11 years did not need to be right or wrong for the brothers to find their way back. They needed only to notice that the love beneath the wound had never actually left, only been obscured by the demand that the wound be resolved first. There is a particular quality to long silences between people who once loved each other easily, a quality that makes them harder to break the longer they persist. Not because the original wound grows larger with time, but because the silence itself becomes a second structure built on top of the first. In the earliest days after a rupture, breaking the silence requires addressing only the original disagreement. But after a year, it requires addressing the disagreement and a year of silence. After 5 years, it requires addressing the disagreement and 5 years of a silence and the accumulated weight of every unanswered letter, every skipped gathering, every mutual friend who has learned to mention one brother carefully in front of the other. The second structure becomes, eventually, more imposing than the first. And it is often the second structure, not the original wound, that actually keeps people apart. It is worth pausing on the specific mechanics of how such silences typically end, because it rarely happens the way people expect it to. Most of us imagine that a rupture like this resolves through a definitive conversation in which one party apologizes clearly, the other forgives clearly, and both walk away with a shared, accurate account of what happened and who bore more responsibility for it. Real reconciliations, when they happen at all, almost never look like this. They tend to happen the way Han and Bo's did. Through a third party's intervention, through circumstances that force proximity neither brother would have chosen on his own, through an illness or a death that reorders, suddenly and without negotiation, what actually matters. The clean resolution we imagine in advance is rarely what arrives. What arrives instead is usually messier, more partial, and, in its own way, more real. This is what makes their mother's intervention so significant. She did not ask them to resolve the inheritance dispute. She did not take a side or produce new evidence that might settle who had been more justified in the original disagreement. She simply named the thing beneath both structures. The love that had existed before either of them knew what an inheritance was, and asked whether that love could be allowed to matter more than the two structures built on top of it. This is often the only way such silences actually break. Not through victory in the original argument, but through someone, sometimes a third party, sometimes one of the two people themselves in a moment of unusual courage, naming the love that both structures have been quietly obscuring the entire time. You may be carrying a silence like this, years of accumulated distance from someone you once loved without complication, a distance that has grown less about the original wound and more about the silence itself, thick now with everything that has gone unsaid in the years since. The love, if Han and Bo's story is any guide, has likely not actually left. It has simply been buried beneath a structure that grew taller with every year the silence continued. Buried is not the same as gone. Let us pause here for a moment, allowing whatever needs to settle quietly. Han and Bo, and the 11 years, and their mother's question about whether the love could exist after the wound if they let it. Let the body consider gently any relationship you carry that has calcified into silence. You do not have to act on this tonight. Simply notice what is there. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a soldier who carried a weight no one else could see. There was a man named Wu who had served in his youth in a period of conflict that had touched his region, not a monk himself in those years, but a young man conscripted into circumstances he had not chosen and had not been prepared for. He had survived the conflict, which many of his companions had not, and had returned to civilian life carrying, in addition to his physical survival, something he did not have words for and did not speak of to anyone. In the years of the conflict, in a moment of chaos and fear that he replayed countless times in the decades that followed, he had made a decision, the details of which he told almost no one, across his entire remaining life, except once, very late, to a monk who had earned his trust over many years of quiet acquaintance. A decision that resulted in harm he had not intended and could not undo. He had been young. He had been terrified. He had acted, in that single moment, according to instincts that war had trained into him faster than wisdom could catch up, and the consequence of that action had stayed with him every day since, a weight he carried privately, that no one in his later life, not his wife, not his children, not his friends, knew anything about. He became, in his later years, a quiet and generous man, well regarded in his community, known for a particular gentleness that people attributed to his temperament, not knowing that the gentleness was in part a form of penance, an ongoing attempt to be, in every subsequent moment of his life, the opposite of the man he had been in that one moment decades before. He gave generously to families in hardship, often more than his own modest means comfortably allowed. He intervened more than once across the decades in conflicts among his neighbors, offering the kind of patient mediation that prevented smaller disputes from becoming larger ones. Those who knew him described him as a man who seemed almost incapable of harsh judgment toward others, a description that would have surprised them considerably had they known the harsh judgment he reserved, every day, entirely for himself. His wife, in the years of their marriage, sometimes asked gently about the distant private quality he carried beneath his evident kindness, a quality she could sense but never quite name, a sense that some part of her husband remained in a room she was not permitted to enter. He deflected these questions with enough warmth that she never pressed further, though she remembered in her own old age after his death, wondering what exactly that room had contained. He came to know a monk named Jian, many years his junior, through a chance friendship that developed slowly over a period of shared interest in gardening. The two men meeting regularly at the small plot behind the temple where Wu had for decades volunteered his afternoons tending vegetables to Nuzet for the resident monks. Jian, newly arrived at the temple in those early years, had been struck by the old man's patience with the soil, his willingness to spend an entire afternoon on a single row of seedlings that a less careful gardener would have finished in an hour. Over time, the shared work became a shared friendship, built slowly across seasons of quiet companionship rather than through any single dramatic conversation. It was not until Wu was an old man, facing his own mortality with the particular clarity that approaching death sometimes brings, a diagnosis that had given him, his physician estimated perhaps a year remaining, that he told Jian what he had carried for nearly 50 years. He chose Jian specifically, he explained afterward, because Jian had known him only as the gentle old gardener with no memory of the young man he had once been, and something in Wu needed, before he died, to know whether that gentle old gardener could survive being fully known by even one other person. He expected, in telling it, some kind of judgment, or at minimum, some visible shift in how Jian regarded him. The revelation of a hidden thing usually changes how we are seen, and Wu had spent 50 years assuming that if anyone truly knew what he had done, they would see him differently, more darkly, than the gentle old gardener everyone else knew. Jian listened to the entire account without interrupting, without shifting his posture, without allowing any flicker of the shock or judgment. Wu had spent 50 years dreading to reach his face. When Wu finished, Jian remained quiet for a long moment, letting the account settle fully in the space between them before offering anything in response. A silence that Wu, watching him closely for the first sign of the withdrawal he expected, initially mistook for the beginning of that very withdrawal, until he realized his old friend was simply thinking carefully, the way he always did before saying something that mattered. Then Jian said, "Thank you for trusting me with this. I want to ask you something, if I may. In the 50 years since that day, how many people have you helped in ways that person could not have imagined helping anyone?" Wu considered this. He said, "I don't know. Many, I suppose. It has been the shape of my life, trying to be useful to people." Jian said, "And in 50 years, has the man who acted in that single terrified moment ever appeared again? Has that same impulse, that same failure, repeated itself in any of the decisions since?" Wu said, "No, never. I have spent every day since trying to make sure it never would." Jian said, "Then it seems to me that you have been carrying a version of yourself for 50 years that stopped existing 50 years ago. The young man in that moment was real, and what he did was real, and I do not say this to minimize what happened or to suggest it does not matter. But you have not been him for half a century. You have been someone else entirely, someone built, in significant part, out of the resolve never to be him again, and that someone has done a great deal of good in this world." Wu said, "It doesn't undo what happened." Jian said, "No, nothing undoes what happened. That is not available to you, and I would not pretend otherwise. If I told you that 50 years of good deeds simply erase what happened in that single moment, I would be lying to you, and you would know I was lying. And the lie would help neither of us. What happened, happened. It remains part of your history permanently, the way the lightning strike remains part of the cedar's trunk permanently. I am not asking you to pretend otherwise, but you have been asking the wound to serve as proof of who you are for 50 years, when the actual proof of who you are is standing in this garden, in the life you have built, in the person your children became, in the quiet reputation you carry in this town. The wound is real. It is also not the whole account. It was never meant to be the whole account." Wu wept for the first time in longer than he could remember, not from renewed pain, but from something closer to release. the release of a man who had been standing trial before himself for 50 years and who had just heard, for the first time, testimony for the defense. What is striking about Wu's 50 years is how invisible the trial remained to everyone around him. His wife, who had shared his life for decades, had no idea her gentle husband carried a private courtroom inside him, convening judgment on the same charge, night after night, for the length of their marriage. His children knew him only as the patient, generous father he had built himself into, never knowing that the patience and generosity were, in some part, an ongoing argument he was making to an invisible jury that never delivered a final verdict, because Wu himself refused, for 50 years, to rest the case. This is a common shape for old wounds of this particular kind, the wounds that involve something we did, rather than something done to us. Grief for a loss can be witnessed, shared, spoken of openly, even ritualized, as Leon's Shoreline pilgrimage shows us. But guilt for an old harm we caused tends to be carried in near total privacy, because speaking it aloud feels, to the person carrying it, like an admission that might justly end whatever regard others hold for them. Wu expected, in telling Jian, that the friendship might not survive the telling. He had, in a sense, been protecting his relationships for 50 years by protecting them from the truth, and in doing so, had denied himself the one thing that might have shortened his private trial much sooner, a witness willing to consider the entire 50 years of evidence, not only the single night that started it. If you are carrying something like Wu's weight, an old failure that you have never spoken aloud, a private verdict you have been rendering against yourself for years without ever calling a witness for the defense, the story offers no shortcut through the difficulty of what happened, but it does offer this. The account is not yet closed until someone besides your own harshest voice has been permitted to review the whole of it, not only the single entry that has been allowed to stand as the entire ledger. You may carry something like this, an old failure, a moment you cannot undo, a version of yourself from long ago that you have never stopped standing trial before. The teaching here is not that the failure did not matter or that harm does not deserve to be reckoned with. It is that 50 years of decisions in the other direction are also real, also part of the account, and that a wound is not required to be the entire verdict on who a person is. Let us pause here for a moment, quietly, without expectation. Wu, and the weight he carried for 50 years, and Jian's question about testimony for the defense. Let the body consider gently whatever old failure you have been standing trial before. The account is larger than the wound. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a woman who returned to the same shoreline every year. There was a woman named Lian who, in her 20th year, lost her closest friend to the sea, a childhood companion named Yue who had drowned during a summer storm that arrived faster than either of them had anticipated while they were swimming together at a beach they had visited every summer of their lives. Lian survived. Yue did not, and for reasons Lian herself could not fully articulate, Even to herself, she returned to that same shoreline every year on the anniversary of the storm, standing at the water's edge for exactly as long as she could bear, before returning to her ordinary life for the remaining days of the year. The ritual itself was simple and unvarying. She traveled to the shoreline alone, always on the same date, always arriving in the late morning as the tide was beginning its retreat. And she stood at the water's edge for exactly as long as she could bear before the grief became too physically overwhelming to remain standing. In the earliest years, this was sometimes only minutes. In later years, as she grew older and the grief settled into something she could hold for longer stretches without being undone by it, she found she could remain for the better part of an hour, watching the water do exactly what it had done on the day it took her friend, indifferent and unchanged by the 4 decades that had passed since. Her family, in the early years, worried about this ritual, believed it kept the wound open in a way that a more complete avoidance might have allowed to close. Her mother, in particular, urged her more than once to consider that the yearly return might be preventing the natural progression of grief, keeping alive each year what time, left undisturbed, might have gradually softened. Friends suggested, gently and then less gently as the years accumulated, that perhaps it was time to stop returning, to let the anniversary pass without the pilgrimage, to find a way to move forward that did not require an annual reopening of the same grief. Leanne continued regardless, not from stubbornness, though it may have looked like stubbornness from the outside, but from something she found difficult to explain. The shoreline was the last place Yue had been alive, and something in her needed, once a year, to stand in that specific place and let the specific grief be exactly what it was, uninterrupted by the demands of her ordinary life, before returning to the world that required her for the rest of the year to function as someone whose close friend had not drowned. In her 40th year of this ritual, she was by then an elderly woman, and the ritual had outlasted most of the people who had once worried about it. She happened to encounter, on the shoreline, a young monk who was traveling through the region and had stopped to rest at the same spot. He noticed her standing at the water's edge with the particular stillness of someone engaged in something private, and asked gently if she would share what had brought her there. She told him the story, the storm, the friend, the 4 decades of returning. She said, near the end, her voice carrying the particular weariness of someone who has defended the same decision many times across many years. Everyone has told me, or over the years, that I should have stopped this by now. That returning keeps the wound open, that I am doing my grief wrong by refusing to let it close. Even my own children, now grown, have gently suggested that perhaps I might consider letting this year pass without the journey, as though 40 years were somehow different from the 39 that preceded it, as though there were a number I was meant to reach, after which the ritual would no longer be necessary. The monk considered this for a while, watching the water continue its slow retreat down the sand. He said, "May I offer a different way of seeing it? some wounds are not kept open by returning to them. Some wounds are given through the returning, a single day each year where they are allowed to be fully what they are, a day set aside specifically for this purpose, so that the other 364 days can be lived without the grief demanding equal space in all of them. The ritual may not be keeping the wound open. It may be what allows the wound to remain closed most of the time, because it has been given its yearly appointment and does not need to insist on being addressed at every other moment as well. Leanne sat with this for a long moment, watching the tide continue its slow retreat, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly that she had not realized was clenched until it began to release. She said, "I had never thought of it that way. I thought I was failing to move on." The monk said, "Perhaps moving on was never quite the right description of what grief asks of us. Perhaps what grief asks is something more like, 'Give me my time, honestly and completely, and I will not demand more than my time.' The people who try to skip the appointment entirely often find the grief arriving unannounced instead at moments they did not choose, because it was never given its proper hour. You have been giving grief its proper hour for 40 years. That is not failure. That may be a kind of wisdom that does not always look like wisdom from the outside." Leanne returned home from that 40th pilgrimage with something she had not expected to receive after 4 decades of the same ritual. Not resolution, exactly, but a kind of permission she had needed and had not known she needed. Permission to continue exactly as she had been, without the added weight of believing she was doing her grief incorrectly. It is worth noticing how much of Leanne's difficulty came not from the grief itself, but from the judgment of others about how her grief should be expressed. Her family's early worry, her friends' gentle and then less gentle suggestions across the years. None of this was cruel or unkind in its intention. People who love us often want, above all, to see our suffering end, and they interpret the continuation of a ritual like Leanne's as evidence that the suffering has not ended, when it may in fact be evidence of the opposite, that the suffering has found a container precise enough to hold it, allowing the rest of life to continue undisturbed around that container. This is worth naming because so many of us carrying old grief have internalized similar suggestions from people who love us. The well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful chorus that says in various forms, "Isn't it time? Shouldn't you be over this by now? Don't you think continuing to mark this is keeping the wound open rather than letting it close?" These suggestions rarely come from malice. They come from people uncomfortable with a grief that does not resolve on the timeline they expected, and from the culturally common but often mistaken belief that grief which continues to be marked is grief that has failed to heal. Leanne's 40 years suggest a different possibility, that some grief is not meant to disappear, and that a container built specifically to hold it, a single day, a single place, a single ritual returned to faithfully, may be exactly what allows a person to live fully in all the days surrounding it. The alternative, avoiding the ritual entirely in an attempt to appear healed, often produces not healing, but displacement. The grief does not go away simply because its designated appointment has been cancelled. It tends, instead, to arrive unannounced, at inconvenient moments, in forms that are harder to recognize and harder to tend than the grief that has been given its honest hour. You may have a wound that asks for its own yearly appointment or its own recurring attention in a way that the world around you has suggested is excessive or unresolved. The teaching here is gentle. The ritual that honors a wound honestly may be exactly what allows the rest of your life to continue without the wound intruding uninvited. Giving grief its time is not the same as failing to heal. Let us pause here for a moment, resting in the quiet between stories, Leon and the Shoreline, and 40 years of an appointment kept faithfully. Let the body consider, gently, whatever ritual of remembering you carry, however the world outside may have judged it. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. Let us explore a story about a musician whose hands were changed by an accident. There was a man named Feng who had played the guqin, a 7-stringed instrument of great age and subtlety, since he was a boy of 7, taught by his grandfather in the unhurried way that such instruments are traditionally taught. Years spent simply learning to sit before the instrument correctly, before a single note was permitted. By the time he reached adulthood, Feng was known throughout his province as among the finest players of his generation. Invited to perform at gatherings that mattered, his reputation resting entirely on the particular sensitivity of his hands, which could produce from the 7 strings a range of feeling that lesser players spent lifetimes failing to reach. In his 34th year, Feng was involved in an accident while traveling. A cart overturned on a mountain road, and in the wreckage, his left hand was crushed beneath a weight that took considerable time to remove. He remembered, in the years afterward, very little of the accident itself, but he remembered with unbearable clarity the moment in the physician's tent when the extent of the damage was first explained to him. The specific, clinical language describing which tendons had been severed beyond repair, which bones had healed already at angles that could not be corrected, delivered by a physician who was, in his own way, being as gentle as the truth allowed him to be. The physicians who treated him did everything available to them, but 2 of his fingers, healed, permanently stiffened, unable to bend with the precision his playing had always required, and a 3rd carried nerve damage that dulled the sensitivity in its fingertip to something far less than what it had been. In the weeks immediately following, Feng experienced something close to a 2nd injury, distinct from the physical one, the injury of realizing that an entire identity, built carefully across nearly 3 decades, had been resting on a foundation that a single overturned cart could remove in an afternoon. He had thought of himself, without ever examining the thought too closely, as a person whose worth was inseparable from what his hands could do. The accident did not only damage his fingers, it exposed cruelly, and without his consent, how much of his sense of himself had been quietly built on something that turned out to be far more fragile than he had ever imagined. The instrument itself remained in its case throughout this time, stored in the same room, where Feng had once practiced daily, close enough that he passed it every time he crossed his own house, far enough from his attention that he had trained himself, mostly successfully, not to look at it directly as he passed. Feng did not play for nearly 2 years after the accident. He could not bear in the early months to sit before the instrument and confront directly what had been taken from him. The specific, irreplaceable capacity that had defined his entire adult identity. Friends and former students visited during those 2 years, some traveling considerable distances specifically to see him, bringing news of the wider musical world he had once been so central to, and gently suggested that perhaps, with time and practice, he might recover some version of his former ability. Feng found these suggestions almost unbearable, because they seemed to imply that the loss could simply be practiced away, when he knew, with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who understood his instrument at the deepest level, that the specific fingers required for the specific pieces he had once played would never move that way again. The wound was permanent. No amount of practice would restore what the accident had crushed. An old friend, a monk named Xuan, who had known Feng since childhood and who had followed his career with genuine pride over the decades, visited him in the 2nd year of his silence. Xuan had made this same visit several times in the 2 years since the accident, each time finding Feng a little further withdrawn than the visit before, his house quieter, his once lively conversation replaced by a polite distance that Xuan recognized from long friendship as the particular quality of a man who has stopped expecting anyone to understand what he is carrying. This visit, Xuan had decided beforehand, would be different from the others. He did not bring the usual encouragements. He simply sat with Feng in his quiet house and, after some time, asked to see the instrument which had sat untouched in its case since the accident. Feng brought it out reluctantly. Xuan opened the case and looked at the instrument for a long while without touching it, studying the 7 strings and the worn places on the wood where 3 decades of Feng's hands had left their particular mark, evidence of a mastery that no one in the room could deny had once been real and extraordinary. Then he said, "I am not going to tell you that you will play as you once did. I don't believe that would be true, and I think you would recognize the lie immediately if I told it. You have spent your whole life around this instrument, and I have spent my whole friendship with you learning when you are being told a comfortable lie. I would rather tell you something harder and truer." Feng said, "Then why did you ask to see it?" Xuan said, "Because I want to ask you a different question than the one everyone else has been asking. Everyone else has been asking whether you can recover what you lost. I want to ask, what can these hands, exactly as they are now, still make? Not the old repertoire. Not the pieces built for fingers that no longer move that way. Something else. Something these hands, with their particular stiffness and their particular dulled fingertip, might be able to say that your old hands never could. Feng said this seemed impossible, that the instrument's entire tradition was built on precision his hands no longer possessed. Suen said perhaps, or perhaps the tradition has simply never needed to accommodate hands like these before, because players with hands like these usually give up entirely, the way you have been doing for 2 years, rather than discovering what remains. I am not asking you to pretend the wound isn't real. I am asking whether you have actually tried, even once, to play with the hands you have now, rather than mourning the hands you had before. Xuan left that afternoon without pressing further, having learned long ago that planting a question well mattered more than forcing an answer from it immediately. Feng sat alone in the silence that followed his friend's departure, the instrument still resting where Xuan had left it, and found that the question would not leave him as easily as he had expected it to. He told himself, through the remainder of that day, that Xuan simply did not understand, that a man who had never spent 30 years mastering an instrument's exact demands could not grasp how absolute the loss truly was, how meaningless it would be to produce mere sound from an instrument that had once been capable, in his hands, of something far more precise. But the question persisted anyway, quietly, beneath his resistance to it, the way certain questions do when some part of us already suspects they deserve an honest answer. Feng, more out of exhaustion with the question than genuine hope, sat before the instrument that evening, after Xuan left, and placed his changed hands upon the strings. The old pieces were, as he expected, impossible. His stiffened fingers simply could not execute the ornaments and rapid figures that had once been effortless. But as he continued, experimentally, avoiding the movements his hand could no longer make, he found something unexpected. His dulled fingertip, less sensitive to fine texture, pressed the strings with a heavier, steadier weight than his old hand ever had, producing a tone that was different from his former playing, less intricate, but deeper, more sustained, carrying a gravity his earlier, more agile playing had never possessed. In the months that followed that first evening, Feng returned to the instrument daily, though not with the discipline of his earlier training. That discipline had been built around a body that no longer existed in the same form. He returned instead with something closer to curiosity, an emotion he had not associated with the Guqin since his earliest childhood lessons, before mastery had replaced discovery as his primary relationship to the instrument. He tried things his old training would have considered beneath him. Simple, slow phrases, single sustained notes, held far longer than any traditional piece required. Experiments that would have embarrassed him in front of his former students, but that no one in this private room was there to judge. He spent the following years developing what became, eventually, an entirely new style of playing, slower, more spacious, built around long sustained tones and simple intervals, rather than the rapid ornamentation his old repertoire had required. It was not what he had played before. Musicians who had known his earlier work sometimes remarked, with a kind of gentle sadness, that his playing had changed. but a new generation of listeners who had never heard his earlier playing and had nothing to compare it against, found in his later work something they described as unusually moving, a depth and patience that his younger, more virtuosic playing, for all its brilliance, had never quite reached. Feng himself came to understand, many years later, that the accident had not simply taken something from him. It had also, alongside the loss, opened a door he would never have found while his old hands remained intact and capable of everything his tradition had always asked of them. The wound had not healed in the sense of his hands returning to what they were, but something had grown from the wound that would not have existed without it. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a genuinely new thing, made possible only by the specific shape of what remained. He spoke of this late in his life to a small circle of students who had come to study his later style specifically. Students who had never known his earlier virtuosic playing and who had no sense of loss attached to the deep, spacious music he now taught them. He told them more than once that he did not wish his accident on anyone, and that he would have chosen, if given the choice at the time, to keep his old hands and his old music rather than discover the new. But he had not been given that choice, and having not been given it, he had eventually discovered that grief and gratitude could occupy the same body at once, without either one cancelling the other out. He grieved his old hands still, sometimes, particularly when he heard young players executing the rapid ornamentation he could no longer manage. And he was, in the same breath, grateful for the music his changed hands had taught him to make, a gratitude that did not require the grief to end first, and a grief that did not require the gratitude to wait. You may carry a wound that has permanently changed what you can do, or be, or offer, a capacity taken that will not return, an ability that used to define you now altered beyond recovery. The teaching here is not that this is secretly a gift, which would be its own kind of cruelty to suggest. The loss is real, and grieving what your old hands could do is not a failure of acceptance. But alongside the grieving, there may be room in time for a different question than the one that first occurs to us. Not can I get back what I lost, but what can these hands, exactly as they are now, still make that the old hands never could? Xuan's visit to Feng is worth returning to for what it did not do as much as for what it did. He did not tell Feng that everything happens for a reason, or that the accident was secretly a blessing, or that Feng would come to be grateful for his crushed fingers. All sentiments that, however well-intentioned, tend to land as a kind of violence against the reality of loss, a demand that the wounded person rush past their own grief in order to make the person offering comfort feel better about the situation. Xuan instead sat with the loss as real and permanent, and only then, once that reality had been fully acknowledged between them, asked a question that pointed forward rather than backward. This ordering matters a great deal. A question like, what can these hands still make? Asked too early, before the grief for what was lost has been given its honest weight, becomes its own kind of second arrow, a demand for premature resilience that skips past the actual patterns in favor of a hopeful narrative that the wounded person is not yet ready to inhabit. Asked at the right time, after 2 years of silence that Xuan did not rush or judge, the same question becomes something else entirely. An invitation offered gently to a door that grief alone would never have revealed. Let us pause here for a moment gently before we continue on. Feng and his changed hands, and the new music that grew from what the accident could not take. Let the body consider gently whatever capacity you have lost that will not return, and whatever unexpected thing may yet grow from the specific shape of what remains. Simply breathe. When you are ready, we will continue together. 7 stories have arrived tonight. Let them settle now, in whatever order they settle, in whatever quiet way the body chooses to receive them. Gotami, walking through every house in the village and discovering that grief, however uniquely hers, belonged also to every family she visited. Hui the gardener, and the cedar that never fully sealed, but grew taller than ever around its scar. Kenji, and the old burn he could not stop touching, and Master Rio's gentle teaching about vigilance becoming its own kind of wound. Han and Bo, 11 years of silence, broken not by resolving who was right, but by remembering the love had never actually left. Wu the old soldier, 50 years of standing trial before a version of himself that had not existed in half a century, and Jian's testimony for the defense. Lian, 40 years of a Shoreline pilgrimage that was not failing to heal, but honoring grief's proper appointment. And Feng, the musician, whose changed hands could not recover what the accident took, but who discovered, in time, a different music that only those particular hands could make. The teaching beneath all 7 is the teaching of the 2 arrows, the first arrow being the wound itself, which we did not choose and cannot always undo, and the second arrow being what we add to it, through resistance, through self-judgment, through the demand that the wound behave according to a timeline it did not agree to. The first arrow is not optional. It arrives the way storms arrive. But the second arrow, the vigilant checking, the standing trial, the belief that a wound not fully closed means we have failed at healing, that arrow is one we can, with practice and with gentleness toward ourselves, learn to set down. This does not mean forcing the wound to close faster. Hui's Cedar teaches us that some wounds are not meant to seal completely, that a tree can grow taller than ever around a scar that never fully closes, and that the growing does not require the scar's disappearance. It means something gentler, tending rather than fighting, staying present rather than demanding resolution on our schedule, allowing the wound the actual time it needs, which may be longer than we would prefer, and may never arrive at the complete closure we have been hoping for, while releasing the additional suffering of believing that this makes us broken or behind or wrong. Kenji's teaching adds something further, that the checking, the touching, the vigilant return to an old wound often comes not from wanting to suffer, but from not quite trusting that the wound is allowed to simply exist, settled and permanent, without our constant supervision. The loosening of this vigilance tends to come not through force, but through simple, repeated noticing, watching the reaching hand without judgment again and again until the reaching itself begins to soften. And Wu's story offers something that many of the others do not name directly, that an old wound, however deep, however deserved our self-judgment might feel, is never the entire account of who we are. 50 years of a different life stand as real testimony alongside whatever happened in the moment that wounded us. The verdict was never meant to rest on a single moment alone. Feng's story offers something further still, perhaps the hardest teaching of the seven, because it does not promise restoration at all. Some wounds do not close, do not seal, do not permit us to return to what we were before. Feng's hands never played as they once had. No amount of gentleness, no amount of patient tending brought back the fingers that the accident crushed. And yet something grew regardless, not a replacement, not a consolation prize dressed up as a gift, but a genuinely new capacity unlocked only by the specific and permanent shape of the loss. This is not true of every wound. Some things taken are simply taken, and no music grows to replace them. But it is true more often than our grief, in its earliest and most absolute moments, allows us to imagine. The door that closes is real. Sometimes, in time, in ways we cannot predict or force. Another door becomes visible that would have remained hidden behind the one that never reopened. Tonight is not a night for resolving any of this completely. It is a night for the smaller, gentler thing, noticing the wound you carry without adding the second arrow of demanding it be different than it is, noticing the vigilance, if it is there, without punishing yourself for it, noticing that whatever house you have walked through in your own grief, other houses have walked through their versions of the same road. There is a thread that runs through all 7 stories that is worth naming plainly before we move toward rest. None of the people in these stories healed quickly, and none of them healed by force. Gotami's grief did not disappear after her walk through the village. It simply found company. Hui's Cedar never sealed, not in 20 years, not ever. Kenji's scar remained exactly as raised and visible as it had always been. Han and Bo's 11 years left a permanent mark on their relationship, even after it was rebuilt. Wu's 50 years of guilt were not erased by Jian's testimony for the defense. They were simply, finally, allowed to be reviewed alongside everything else that was true about him. Lian's 40 years of Shoreline pilgrimage did not end the story. They continued faithfully, exactly as they had before, but with the added lightness of no longer being judged as failure. And Feng never regained the hands he lost. What changed in every single case was not the wound. What changed was the relationship to the wound, the quality of attention brought to it, the willingness to stay present without demanding it resolve on command, the release of the second arrow that had been adding unnecessary weight to an already sufficient burden. This is, perhaps, the most honest thing that can be said about wounds of this depth. They do not always close, but the suffering added on top of them, the vigilant fighting, the private trials, the belief that healing correctly requires disappearance, that suffering is, in every one of these stories, something that eventually loosened once it was met with gentleness instead of force. That is enough for tonight. The rest, the tending, the growing around the scar, the slow loosening, happens in its own unhurried time, the way it always has, the way it always will. Let the body rest now, fully, without reservation. Let the stories find their places, however they choose to settle, in the quiet architecture of the body that does not require your conscious attention to do its work. Let the shoulders soften, dropping away from the ears, where they may have been held for longer than you realized. Notice, if you can, whether you are holding tension in the specific places where old wounds tend to gather, the jaw, the chest, the space just behind the eyes. Let that tension be noticed without being forced to release. Sometimes noticing alone begins the loosening, the way Kenji's noticing eventually loosened his vigilant touching, not through force, but through patient attention. Let the hands rest wherever they are resting, on the chest, at the sides, open or loosely curled, unclenched now from whatever they have been gripping through the day. These are the hands that have carried whatever you carry. They do not need to accomplish anything more tonight. Feng's hands, changed permanently by circumstance, still found their way to music in time. Your hands, whatever they have been through, whatever they have had to set down or hold on to too tightly for too long, are allowed simply to rest now, without needing to prove anything about their capacity or their recovery. Let the feet, too, be noticed and released, however they are resting. There is no part of the body tonight that needs to remain alert, watchful, prepared for anything. The watching can rest along with everything else. Notice the weight of the legs heavy against whatever surface holds them. Notice the specific place in the body where you tend to carry old grief. Some carry it high, in the chest and throat. Some carry it low, in the stomach and hips. Some carry it as a general heaviness that does not localize to any single place. Wherever it lives in you tonight, let it be acknowledged without needing to be moved, resolved, or explained. The body already knows how to hold what it is holding. It has been doing this faithfully for as long as you have carried it, without complaint, without demanding recognition, simply continues its patient work night after night, regardless of whether you have thanked it or even noticed it was there. Feel the weight of the body against whatever is holding it, the mattress, the pillow, the surface, that asks nothing of you except your presence, that has been faithfully bearing your weight every night without complaint or condition. This surface does not require the wound to be healed before it will hold you, does not measure your worth against how quickly you have recovered, does not withhold its support until you have earned it through visible progress. It holds you exactly as you are, wound and all, the way the ground held the cedar through every year of its unsealed scar, without asking the tree to be anything other than what it was. Let the breath move slowly, in gently, reaching down into the places that have been guarded, the places that have held vigilance for longer than they needed to. Out, longer, releasing what does not need to be held through the effort of holding, releasing the vigilance itself along with the breath. You are not required to have healed by morning. You are not required to have made peace with anything specific before sleep arrives, or to have found the answer to any question these stories may have raised in you tonight. Tonight is simply for tending, the way Wei tended his cedar, not forcing the scar to look slow, but continuing to water and protect and care for the tree exactly as it was, wound included, patient across seasons that did not always show visible progress. Some of you are carrying something that opened again today, and some of you are carrying something that has never fully closed across many years, and some of you are simply tired in the particular way that comes from long vigilance over an old and tender place, a tiredness that rarely announces itself clearly, but accumulates quietly across seasons. All of this is welcome in this rest, exactly as it is, without editing, without needing to be presented in any particular light. None of it needs to be resolved before you are allowed to sleep. There is no need to rush toward sleep, and no need to resist it either. Simply remain here in this quiet middle place between waking and rest for as long as the body needs before it lets go entirely. Let the mind, if it wants to, return briefly to whichever of tonight's 7 stories settled most closely to your own experience. You do not need to analyze it. You do not need to extract a lesson from it or apply it to your own life in any deliberate way, or decide tonight what any of it means for tomorrow. Simply let the image arrive if it wants to. The mustard seed carried from house to house, the cedar's long, pale scar weathering quietly on its hillside, the old burn beneath a searching hand, 2 brothers standing at either side of a bed, neither expected to share again. A soldier's 50 years of private testimony finally heard by another, a woman standing faithfully at the water's edge year after year, a musician's changed hands finding an unexpected note that his old hands never could have played. Let whichever image is yours simply be present without demand, the way a friend sits beside you without needing to say anything at all. Present, patient, unhurried, asking nothing of you except that you allow the company. The second arrow, wherever it lives in you tonight, does not need to be defeated in one sitting. It has likely been present for a long time, and it will likely visit again in its own time, on its own schedule, exactly as it has visited many times before. But for these remaining minutes, before sleep arrives, you are invited to set it down, not permanently, not with the pressure of a decision that must hold forever, but simply for tonight. The bow can be picked up again tomorrow if it insists, and if it does, that will simply be tomorrow's practice, met with the same gentleness this night is offering you now. Right now, there is only the first arrow, held as gently as the night allows, and the vast, quiet architecture of the body doing what it already knows how to do, which is rest, unhurried and complete, the way it has done every night of your life before this one. Breathe in slowly all the way down, and out slowly, releasing. Again, in all the way down, and out slow and complete. The village that Gotami walked is around you tonight, every house holding its own version of what you carry, none of them exempt, all of them, in their own way, finding their way through. You are not walking alone tonight, even in this dark, even in this particular hour when the wound feels most present. Every house in every village that has ever existed has held its own version of what you carry, and somewhere in this same dark hour, countless others are lying just as you are, tending their own old wounds with whatever gentleness they can find. The cedar stands on its hillside with its long, pale scar, taller now than it was before the lightning found it, still growing, still standing, wound included. The shoreline where Leon kept her faithful yearly watch is quiet tonight too. The tide moving in and out the way it always has, indifferent and eternal, holding no grudge against the grief it once caused, and asking nothing of anyone who stands at its edge. Let the eyes rest, heavy now, no longer needing to stay open against the pull of sleep. Let the jaw soften. Let the second arrow, whatever form it takes tonight, be gently set down, not conquered, not defeated, simply set down the way a bow is set down at the end of a long day, to be picked up again another time if it is needed, but not tonight. Tonight is for the first arrow only, held gently, without the added weight of demanding it behave differently than it does. Whatever you carry, however old, however tender, however far from closed, is welcome here in this rest exactly as it is, requiring nothing further from you tonight except your presence and your breath. Breathe and rest. Whatever wound brought you here tonight will still be there in the morning, in whatever form it takes, needing nothing more from you right now than this rest, this breath, this permission to simply be held rather than holding. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Quiet Lotus Sleep.